Hi, y'all. This is Kristen Chenoweth.
Hi, I'm Gloria Stefan.
This is Sarah Bareilles.
Hi, I'm Patty Lapone.
This is Lin-Manuel Miranda. You're listening to the Broadway Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Theater Podcast, intimate personal conversations with the industry's biggest names. I am your host, Alan Seals. This episode is with Laura Bell Bundy, who, if you don't know her, she's just a goofball. I love her. I love talking with her. We've actually been working pretty closely together over the last year or so on her own podcast, Women of Tomorrow, also on the Broadway Podcast Network. It is a deep dive into women's history and women's rights and equality and the topics that we all just need to be talking about right now. She and her writing partner, Shay Carter, also just dropped their brand new album, Women of Tomorrow. Coincidentally, the same name as their podcast, which is an amazing dive into all of the topics aforementioned. This conversation you're about to listen to is just refreshingly honest. It's amazing. Laura Bell is so funny, and I know I said it at the beginning, but she's just a goofball. She likes to talk about poop, so, we're kindred spirits. On a serious note, we do talk about sexual assault and domestic violence, so there is a little bit of a trigger warning here in case that affects you. Before we get into this, please find me online on Instagram and Twitter at theater_podcast. Leave a rating, leave a review, hit that follow button, that like button, whatever you can do to help spread the word and keep the podcast going. Now please enjoy this episode with Laura Bell Bundy.
Here you go. 1, 2, 3.
I actually normally start my interviews with reading this whole bio and introducing the guest and kind of setting up the interview. And this interview is going to be completely different. I just want to start talking because literally I went to your website and I was like, okay, what can I pick out? I'm going to write this bio. And it's just too freaking much to introduce. So I'm going to record all this separately. I haven't decided how I'm going to introduce you yet, but
Okay.
but I wanted to say, of course, welcome to the Theater Podcast.
I can give you highlights.
Well, I want to start with the beginning. I've known you for a while, and as is happening with most people that I get to know in the last year and a half, I've gotten to know a lot of people in this space, and I've never met them in person yet because of #COVID. But right. I know a lot about you. I know a lot about what you're into, and obviously know you offline and from what I can read online. And I didn't know about your origin story of winning your, what is it, Miss Northern Hemisphere? Miss Pee-wee Hemisphere. No, that's what it's called.
Pee-wee Hemisphere. Just the hemisphere. There's no Northern or Southern, just the hemisphere.
It's just winning Miss Hemisphere. Right. So you're Miss a native Pee-wee. Of Kentucky. People obviously know you as Elle Woods from Legally Blonde and your other Broadway credits and 100 million TV credits. It's insane. But you do so much. You do producing. You have your own production company. You have all of these things. And you're akin to my heart in that I feel like you just can't sit still. And on top of all of that, you come from the South. I do too. And then you're adding social justice to all of it. And so your album Women of Tomorrow just came out, and it's all about breaking the glass ceiling, women's empowerment, and it goes along with the Women of Tomorrow podcast of the same name, which I run the sessions for you, and I have learned so much by doing these sessions, being in these things with you, and you and your partner, Shay Carter, the two of you are phenomenal, and I've talked a lot. I want to ask a question here. All right. So we're going to talk about all this stuff, but tell us, who all of us listening now in your own words, how did you just get into this crazy damn business and how do you do so much?
I got into this business because my mom put me in a pageant when I was 5. Now, the reason that she put me in a pageant was her sister had won Miss Kentucky and was semifinalist in Miss America. And my aunt had taught herself to sing and play the piano, and my grandfather was a singer and my mom was not. It was very much a Mama Rose story, like Southern Mama Rose. She's like, I don't have the talent, but my child does, and I'm gonna make her a star, that kind of thing. Except for with a Southern accent, And so she put me in this pageant, and I won the local and then I go to the state level, I win, and I go to the national level,
So
which
local hemisphere, and then state hemisphere, and then eventually you're getting
County of Kentucky, and then the Little Miss Pee Wee Hemisphere of Kentucky, and then just Little Miss Pee Wee Hemisphere, and I won a new car, F5. Yeah, don't really know what the thought process was in there. My mom was like, "We'll take the money." I remember it being a hideous car. It was hideous. Then shortly after, a couple months later, my mom gets this call from the pageant director saying the Phil Donahue show, which was, these types of shows, Sally Jesse Raphael, Geraldo, Phil Donahue, Oprah at the time, they were all doing these panel shows. And we were invited. We were going to get an all expense paid trip to New York City. We were like, let's go to Kmart and get some new clothes. My mom had a dress made for me just for the occasion. And so we go. I stay at the Sheraton Hotel on 7th Avenue. It's very exciting. The Lindy's is right down the way, and I think it's still there. And I had cheesecake. And then we get to the show, and it turns out it's an expose on children's pageants.
They didn't tell you this.
No. We think it's a celebration of pageants. I've got my runway walk down. You should see, I have video of this. I'm doing my runway walk. I turn around. Then they have these moms on the stage. They bring on a child psychologist, and they've got these people in the audience like, I can't believe you're doing this to your daughter. You're like, it's so ridiculous. Look at her, blah, 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 blah. And they're all just sort of turning on all the mothers. And my mom was not on the stage. She was in the audience, and she stands up to defend herself. And then I reach for Phil Donahue's mic. I'm 5. I look like John Bonet. I was like a gay man trapped in the body of John Bonet. So I'm like grabbing the microphone, and he's like, this little girl would like to say something. So I defend my mom, and I'm like, I like pageants. I like modeling. I like dancing. And they laughed at me. They laughed at me. And there's like footage of this one woman doing like a wind-up toy thing. And of course, I'm sure my mom coached me. Well, I'm sure she definitely coached me, like what to say. And now I know the feeling that I had in that moment. Now I've identified it as shame. At the time, I just felt real icky. And I think that was the first time I experienced shame. But my mom was like, let's shine this turd. And, or as my dad said, let's turn chicken shit into chicken salad. And it's
a horrible analogy.
That's good. That's good with some iced tea, some sweet tea.
Sweet tea and some pig shit, some chicken shit.
So I'm little. My mom is like, waltzes my little tookus all the way over to Ford Modeling Agency, which is like 59th Street and 1st Avenue, which is very far away from 7th Avenue, wherever we were. And we go in. I remember it being kind of a gray, gloomy, rainy day. And she says, I'm here to see the children's division. And there's a guy at the front, and he's like, ma'am, do you have an appointment? And she's like, well, no. But this is Miss Pee Wee Hemisphere, and we're leaving tomorrow. So if they're going to meet her, they're going to need to meet her now. And he's like, okay. So he calls and has his own, probably like, there's a crazy lady down here. Yeah, the kid's okay. Sends us up, and they sign me to a 5-year contract.
Seriously, right? Like they just say sight unseen, or they just look at you and they're like, okay, they'll sign her up.
They see me, and I think my mom had like some, portfolio or something that she was showing them of pictures of me. Like, this is her here. This is where she won the car. This is here. This is her dancing, And then I remember them having me like, stand straight, turn profile, and maybe something else, and ask me a couple questions. And I probably did some modeling poses or something, because I was pretty physical as a kid in terms of like, I think I had a little ADD, and that's why like I was, my mom had me in dance. And I mean, literally, this was like a day in the life of me at 5 was like your dance lesson, your singing lesson, your piano lesson, your tennis lesson, your swimming lesson, it was like your gymnastics lesson. It was just so many things all the time. And then I guess what I really loved was singing and dancing and connecting with people. So modeling was like, it was fine. But so I ended up getting this modeling contract. My mom was like, we live in Kentucky. I don't know how we're going to do this. And so they said, well, you can be what's called a summer kid and just come for the summers. And so I would go to school in Kentucky. And in the summer, I would come to New York. And I would also train with different singing teachers and go to Broadway Dance Center. I had a little Broadway Dance Center card when I was 6 years old.
Oh,
And I would go to these adult classes and like do my, where they have like the basic classes. My mom would put me in the basics, but it was like it was just me and a bunch of adults but mostly adults that didn't speak English. Right after this event at the Ford Modeling Agency where we signed the contract, we leave. We don't have any money, so it's probably we got a hot dog on the street or something. And my mom was like, we're going to go see a Broadway show. So she went to the ticket booth of the Palace Theater and said, what's your cheapest and best ticket? And so they put us in a box, and I saw Starlight Express, which was my first Broadway show. So on the same day of that Phil Donahue show, I got a contract with Ford Modeling Agency and my career began, and I saw my very first Broadway show.
wow. And I guess that's when you got the acting bug or whatnot. And I'm reading in your bio here, too, that at age 9, you had your stage debut at Radio City Music Hall. It's interesting to me because the preconceived notion I have of the pageant kid is, I guess, coming from money, really. It's like the affluent parents that are just like, I'm going to continue the legacy and make sure that my child is better than everything that right? And you're shaking your head, making a funny face. Obviously, that is not the case.
No, it's a bunch of moms living through their daughters wanting to win prize money.
But, I guess that makes sense. Yes.
And who have had, I think, I will say this in the South, culturally, the 50s and 60s, it was customary for women to be in beauty competitions because the focus was on our outer beauty, not on our brains. But what happened is with certain pageants, scholarship money was available. Like for the Miss America pageant, scholarship money was available only to go to college. And that's why my aunt did it. And she had a full ride to go to school when she won. And so I think for my mom, sort of that thinking was a part of it. Like, maybe we can afford to send our daughter to college one day, but maybe she could also earn it herself by traipsing around in a bikini at 5. So messed up. But I will say it did instill in me confidence. I almost said competition, and definitely it did that too. I confidence and a sense of healthy competition, right? So I won. And when you win at a very young age, you think you can win other things in life. And it gave me that belief. Now I look back and I go, yeah, I peaked at 5. But but really, like, I think it did instill in me some confidence. And then, of course, with the Phil Donahue situation, them turning on us, I was like, wait a minute. You guys don't love me? You're critiquing me? What I'm doing is wrong? How is this? How should I feel? Why should I feel ashamed that I look cute and I can turn around like this? So there was a lot of mixed things, but I got a lot of information. I learned a lot at that time very fast. And then we went to New York and we didn't have any money and we're living there in the summer and we're staying the rat hole, the roach hole with the Russian lady who I think was in the CIA. I don't know what was going on, but it was very weird. We would find her in the closet sometimes sleeping. Yeah.
What? That's...
These are we had to get sublet apartments every time we came to New York in the summer.
And she was sleeping in the closet?
Yeah. Yeah, my mom. Yeah, we found some just crazy things. Like once, this was a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment. The woman wanted $2,000 for the summer. And my mom was like, I only have $1,000. And she's like, yeah, well, maybe I can. She didn't say it like that. She was like, listen, maybe I can have you come stay here. I come every once in a while. I stay at house a couple times in the summer. So she wouldn't tell us when she was coming, she'd just show up, she'd open up the coat closet, and she'd be sleeping on like an air mattress in her coat closet or something. And then one time, my mom lifted up the mattress of that she was she was hearing things like crunchy sound. She lifted up the mattress, and there was just a bunch of condom wrappers underneath.
Oh God. Oh.
Yeah, now not condoms, just wrappers. Okay, but I guess they were going there, and my mom wasn't sure what was going on in that house. In that apartment, and I have so many stories. So many stories.
It sounds like you said you peaked at 5, and you felt shame and all that, and all of a sudden realize that you're not as awesome as everyone's made you out to be. Most people go through that. Most people go through that in their like mid-20s, maybe around 30 or whatnot. Like you did that at such a young age that I feel like that explains so much about you, what I know about you now, because you're just like unapologetically just like, fuck it, I'm me, take it or leave it, I don't care. And I think that's like the older 60, 70-year-old people who have had that experience in life, who are just like, whatever, I'm old and I get it and nothing matters anymore. You've already, like, your emotional shame happened at such a young age that now you're just like, whatever, I don't care, I'm just gonna do it. Right?
There's also, I think maybe there's also so many, when you're a young person and you're auditioning, there's so many have to be's, right? You have to be this, and you have to be that, and you have to be this in order to get the job or in order for people to like you. And at some point that just becomes totally exhausting. And you realize what really matters is not only being who you are, but that's really the only way you're going to connect. That's the only way you're going to connect with the material, with the director, the casting, with the audience, with anybody, is a feeling of truth, and instead of a lot of pretense. And so that's why I just gave up that other.
A lot of people
gave all that other horse shit.
A lot of people may never get that though, because even speaking for myself too, going into auditions, I would go in and do what I thought the casting director wanted. And I thought, like you said a second ago, everybody wants you to be this and wants you to do that. But the people that I've seen now, I'm 40, the people that I've seen now and the peers at this level, the ones that have talked to me about their success and how they really got there are the ones who just like literally just said, I'm going to go in, I'm making my choices, I'm being bold, I'm going to do me, I'm going to do my truth. And then that fits the part. And you hear all the time that the part was, people come out of auditions and they say, I lost the job, I screwed it up. And then I think it was Michael Urie told me, the job was never yours. Right. How do you think you lost it? It was never yours. It didn't belong to you. So you go and you do your thing. And all I'm just trying to say is that I think you had a very young age obtained a sense of self-awareness, I guess, that some people even now at our age still don't have. Well,
thank you. Listen, I take it as a compliment because I think self-awareness is the most important thing for people to have. And I also have to say, too, that I get angry with myself for not being more self-aware. Like, I think that's kind of what the journey of life is becoming more self-aware. I mean, there's plenty of times where I have a total lack of awareness. I'm waking up in the morning and I'm making noise and my husband's still sleeping, or that's more that happens at night and he's already asleep. And it's him waking up in the morning doing that. But those are those just like thoughtfulness and self-awareness, and especially now during a time of great change and resistance and the persistence of resistance, it's so important to be self-aware. But it's hard to know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's important too, is to have a sense, or just to have an awareness that you don't know it all. And there's so much more to learn. And you're going to get to be surprised, which is great.
You know what one of my biggest fears is that my brain, like studies have shown, right, around your mid 30s to late 30s into your 40s, your brain starts to calcify and you literally lose the ability to form new synapses. You literally lose the ability to form new synapses, and essentially you lose the ability to learn. And that's one of my biggest fears, and part of the reason why I'm always trying to do new things, and even challenging yourself to brush your teeth with the opposite hand. Just do something different, right? Right? Do something that's going to make your brain go, hold on a second, I don't need to calcify here. This isn't automatic anymore. So I'm always looking for those little opportunities to like take a different route than something I've walked before, or try to brush my teeth with my non-dominant hand every now and then to keep my brain from getting lazy.
And to keep your teeth rotting away.
I can't get the back teeth. I don't know.
I forgot about this molar.
Well, then, okay, so talking about the self-awareness, I want to bring that to Women of Tomorrow, and the whole album and the podcast and everything, the description, it says was born out of the 2016 election. And well, I guess have you explain it as to why all of a sudden, was it like a light switch, or was it something gradual where you decided like, I actually need to start learning about this, or I'm just not okay with it anymore? And then how did that translate into what became Women of Tomorrow?
Well, there is a light switch for sure. There was a moment where I went, holy crap, have I been living under a rock? Why do I feel like we are, as women, collectively hitting a glass ceiling together? When the election was going on between Hillary and Donald Trump. And part of it was just seeing the way that she was treated in the media versus him, the way that she had to behave in order to be considered serious versus him. Her ability, her background, all of the work that she had done to get to that place versus him having really not done anything. Mm-hmm. And some of that was just so mind-blowing to me. And I understand that the party that he was going for felt like they had been betrayed by the government. And so there was almost like an acceptance of the fact that he wasn't qualified. That was a good thing. But to me, that was really glaring, where you have this person who might have been the most qualified person ever to be president being treated in a way like, oh, she's wearing this, her hair, her voice is shrill, just things like that, where she's acting bossy. She's not smiling enough. She's smiling too much. Like, these things have nothing to do with her ability to do the job properly. Right. And some of that stuff really bothered me. The double standard became glaring. And, it's interesting, like, as an actress, I'm always up against women. I'm very rarely up against men for the same role. So I don't see as much of that. I don't get in my world for as an actor or as a singer. What I can say is that the juicy, meaty roles up until recently were always written for men, or the substantial ones, or ones that weren't based on being a sex object or a dumb blonde or a whatever. Those types of roles it would be awesome if there were more for women, and there are more being written for women. So that was some of the things I was realizing. But then I did this concert called Double Standards. It inspired me to have this idea, that moment where I did a concert that was like, the Broadway gals version of a women's march, where two female singers would come together to sing a duet on a jazz standard, all in the name of women's rights and women's health. And we raised over $100,000. We did it at the town hall for ACLU, Planned Parenthood, and the National Breast Cancer Coalition, because it was for women's rights and health. And I decided to do little tidbits about women and women's history in the intros. And I was overwhelmed at the things that I was finding out that I didn't know. Like, it wasn't until 1974 that a woman could take out a credit card without the permission of her husband or her father.
74.
74. Yeah. 74. That was 7 years before I was born. No wonder my mom felt like she had to get married early.
When was the date that birth control became legal for non-married couples?
In 1972, single women, unmarried couples could legally obtain birth control. And that included the birth control pill, which also had been available for married couples since 1965. And research to make a pill had been underway for, I think, 50, 60 years. So these facts like these, were really overwhelming to me. Things that I didn't know. And the women that had to fight for these rights that I currently have, I completely took for granted.
And that are threatened at the threat of being taken away again.
At the threat of being taken away, for sure.
Yes.
I think collectively as women, we were a lot of progressive women were very afraid when Donald Trump got elected because of an awareness that these rights that we have, these freedoms that we enjoy now, were not a given. They were fought for. People lost everything for them. And so they're not a given. They can be taken from us at any time. And I think that he sort of represented a misogynistic, sexist, a patriarchy at its finest. And so that's where I think a lot of that uprising began. And, to just talk about openly sexually assaulting a woman is very scary. And if a person is going to be the leader of the land saying something like that, how many other people think that's acceptable?
Well, your episode 1 of Women of Tomorrow podcast, you and Shay went into the history like so deep, and I'm not going to ask you to repeat any of it now. And I want everyone listening to go and check out episode 1 of Women of Tomorrow. We'll link to the podcast in the show notes for this episode. But like every time I record with the two of you, I am floored. And your episode 1 guest, by the way, was Amy McGrath, who was running against Mitch McConnell for U.S. Senate. Unfortunately, she did not win. Spoiler alert. But at the time, she was still a candidate. And just like for me, this seems like very obvious stuff that like, why can't everyone choose for themselves? And this is my ignorance as a cis white man, not ever having to deal with not having these choices or being unable to choose for myself, right? I just assumed that everyone else had the same freedoms that I did. And that's my fault that I am now learning. So I enjoy so much sitting in with on the sessions with you and Shay and learning everything that you have and hearing from all your guests. And just the interview with Anika Nani Rose is still sitting with me because as a woman of color, a Disney princess of color, she's got her own set of standards that have been placed on her. And then inside the Broadway community, and we all know what's going on now with the Scott Rudin shit and the March on Broadway and how it all ties into lack of diversity and lack of equity. And like there is so much now that is coming out of New York and coming out of movements that are started by people like you that are now filtering out to the rest of the world. And you started it a long time ago. And I think this goes to, well, let's bring this back to your album, right? Because every song is focusing on a different topic in a lack of rights or women's equity or whatnot, right? So every different track is tackling something specific.
Yeah, we're every song is dealing with an issue that women are facing today, whether that be breaking the glass ceiling, doing it all, meaning doing too much, the mental load, motherhood, equal pay, consumerism and unattainable beauty standards, obsession with social media, our relationship to men, and the way men treat us. We tactfully and musically tackle sexual assault with a song called Red Rover. Now, all of this is in music, and you hear it, and it sounds like it's this sort of big band, jazzy, like almost like it sounds like an classic MGM movie musical with modern elements. It feels very dreamy. But the topics that we're talking about are very modern and, in fact, sometimes quite shocking. And some of it is a celebration, like Get a Girl You Go is a celebration of how far we've come and breaking the glass ceiling. But then there are other songs that, like Digital Disease or Red Rover, that are haunting. And then our cover we did of Girls Just Want to Have Fun, which the video deals with domestic violence against women, because 1 in 5 women experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Actually, no, 1 in 4 women.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's more.
Violence in their lifetime, yeah.
Well, it's domestic violence, and I think is it 1 in 4 experiences domestic violence, 1 in 3 is sexually assaulted. I think that's the stat.
I think 1 in 5.
1 in 5. It's too high. Whatever
anyway,
it is.
It shouldn't happen the way that we see that.
We're going to take a short break. Stay tuned for more of the episode.
I gotta say, it's interesting. Like I set out, I was passionate. I think I was passionate because I really think women are awesome.
Yeah.
Like I've never really met a woman who couldn't do what they were asked to do and 5 other tasks at the same time. And then see them do that. And then I trust that the job is going to get done. And I think my appreciation of women throughout my lifetime has definitely grown. And then after becoming a mom, it's grown more. A wife and a mom, it's grown more in terms of the expectations that have been put on women that I felt being put on me as well as the responsibilities that I have in raising another human being and the way that my biology works in order to do that. I was like, whoa, we are pretty incredible. There is nothing weak about this sex. Like, you try to push a baby out of your penis.
No, thank you.
So there are some things like that. Like, I'm just amazed at the power of the female body and the fact that it's been labeled, or that someone could call someone as an insult a pussy. Like, oh, you're a pussy. I'm like, wow, that's a compliment. Do you know what this thing can do? This is something pretty strong. Thank you so much. So I've just felt, I started to feel very, very passionate about the power of women and wanting women to feel the power that they have. And half of the stuff that I began to tackle and write about, or that we talk about on the podcast, some of those things I know, and some of those I'm learning as I go. And a part of it is my own research about my own gender. And I really did become obsessed with women's history. I love women's history. I love to investigate it. It wasn't taught in my education growing up. I mean, there's a couple of women you always hear about. And the way that they are recorded in history is also really interesting too. Like anything we hear about Cleopatra, it's very sexualized. And she was actually pretty dowdy in real life. But it's just more exciting when a woman is like,
it's like she can't be powerful without being pretty.
When we talk about her boobs, that's what we want. We want to talk about her boobs, not about her brains.
Well, yeah, that's very interesting. I like, she can't be pretty. She can't be successful without being pretty. The two just can't coexist in history.
Or there's all these kind of comments, like when we talk about a woman negatively, we tend to go to her appearance or her sexuality. Like we either say she was a whore or she was frumpy, and it's always got to go back to a woman's appearance and desirability. It always goes back to that, even in the media. Like when we're talking about a politician, it always goes back to that.
Like if she's less less desirable than, well, like it's an insult to be less desirable, so you call her words that therefore have the connotation of being less desirable.
Right. And it's also an insult if she's too desirable.
So that's
So
just
then she's a whore. There's no way. It's a double bind. It's a double bind. There's no way. It's the way that things have been set up. The way that things have been set up for years and years and years is about desirability. And some of that comes from basic biology. Listen, procreation, women are the creators. We birth the human race. There are different biological things of attraction, finding a mate and then having offspring. And that kind of makes the world go round. But what we've done, or what society has done in terms of selling this idea about a woman's value, is that the only value is in the desirability and in the birthing, right? And that's it. And so she should just be kept quiet until she's ready to go from being her father's property to her husband's property, and then her son's. It's just that's how things operated for forever, unless you were lucky enough to stay single and run a whorehouse, and then you had some power.
Yes, because sex is power. What is? I forget the other stat. There's another stat that you've mentioned in your podcast too. That when, I don't know if you remember this off the top of your head, of when women were able to own their own gifts.
Yeah, so that was 1848, the Married Women's Property Act. Women, prior to that, the laws of coverture, which came from England, were the norm, where not only was a woman considered the property of her husband and her father, right? So from her father, then became the property of her husband, and any of her property would then be controlled by her husband. So if she made any money or received any gifts, it was going to be controlled and handled by her husband. But in this Married Women's Property Act of 1848, the laws changed. Women were allowed to earn and control their own wage, receive and keep their own gifts, and decide what they were going to do with them. And they were also given shared custody of their children. So in the event of the death of their husband, they could control what happened to their children, whereas before it would go to like the nearest male relative. And then I guess in a rare case of divorce in 1848, which was definitely not the norm, a woman did have some rights. But prior to that, women did not have custody to the children they gave birth to.
That's insane. And especially because it didn't used to be like that. And I forget if it was through you or something else that I heard that it was like the invention of farms and crops? Like,
that was definitely probably our podcast.
Yeah. That because whenever everybody went out together and everything was equal, right. It was an equal male and female society.
It was an egalitarian society. Men did the hunting and women did the gathering because they were often nursing, and so it was easier for them to do that. But there were some group hunting activities as well, with an entire tribe together. These are sort of nomadic tribal societies, would say like 200,000 years ago, maybe up until, I don't know, 20,000. I don't know when it was. But so we were hunter-gatherers, and because women were gathering nuts and seeds, it's believed that women were the ones who noticed that the seeds would then grow the plants to grow more fruit and more crop. So they created farming. And then because of this food and the availability of the food, it wasn't as necessary to hunt, but also they had to stay in one place. So these lands had to be cultivated, and they also had to use animals to cultivate. So the men would then be like training the oxen and this type of thing to help with the farming and and all of that. And the land, because they were doing this level of labor on the farm in the one place, they considered the land theirs. And that was the moment that women came inside and were doing the weaving and were taking the crops and turning it into the food and the flour and things like this. And her job became in the house and the land became his. And to ensure that this land was going to be passed down to his own children, he needed to guarantee the virginity of the woman that he had children with. Make sure the kids were his. Because prior to that, like, nobody really knew. There are accounts very, very early on of women being regarded as goddesses because they did not know how babies came to be. They did not know that women had ovaries and men had sperm, and that's how it worked. They did not know that. They just were like, and she's growing and she will give birth and she is a goddess. She created this child all on her own. And so she was regarded in that way. So if you see stories have been collected, and listen, all I want to say about anybody who's like Adam and Eve, and Adam came first, was it the chicken or the egg? The chicken is always a female.
That's true.
So I am of the belief that the first human was a woman. Because how else would the rest of, the logic, the scientific logic, there's just in the research that I've done in terms of the history that I've seen, the history that I've read, and there's a lot of things written to control women. There's so many stories, whether that be biblical or mythological, that are used to control women and to guarantee the passing down of money. Money. And this is what I'm seeing now. It literally makes my stomach churn, the realizations that I'm having about our country, and the problems that we have really come from greed. Women's inability to have rights come from greed.
Yeah.
The people of color's inability to have rights comes from greed. And the people that are doing this and not seeing this go to a church every Sunday, put their hand on the Bible, and don't see the connection. That greed built the country they live in, and greed is the root of our problem. Greed is why women didn't have rights, And
we're talking mostly, as we're saying these dates of things that have happened, it's primarily been focused on white women too. So women of color have it that much harder.
Absolutely. We have to be really careful, and it's really hard because history is written by the people who win history, which has historically been straight white men. And the way that history is written, you just, if you don't have power, you don't get yourself written into the history books. And people don't necessarily notice your accomplishments. In 1848, we were dealing with entirely different issues when it came to people of color. We celebrate women getting the right to vote in 1920, but women of color did not have the right to vote until 1965.
Right.
And here's something that I just learned from our podcast we did about money that I thought was really interesting. There was the Mothers' Welfare Act in the 1920s because women had begun to get into the workforce, especially shortly at the end of the 1800s, and the ability to own, the ability to own property and earn a living wage. And so women were in the workplace. There began to be union organization. And then there were also very poor single mothers who were eligible for the Women's Welfare Act. But Black women were not eligible for that. So if you were a Black woman who had children, the assumption was that you were going to work. What was happening with their children? And the other thing is that after the end of the Civil War, when Black people were trying to figure out how to earn a living wage and how they were going to acclimate into society, which the Reconstruction was terribly reconstructed. It was awful. We know that. These problems persist today, and now we're hoping for a new Reconstruction. What was happening is that Black men were less likely to be hired than white men, and so Black women were forced to also work. So this was two-parent income for, most, I would say, I think it was 40% of Black mothers were working.
Wow.
And they were working basically in domestic service, so taking care of white women's children. And those jobs, historically and to this day, do not have benefits.
Yes.
They do not have paid sick leave. We could go on. There's always these different, you always have to, I've found that it's very hard to get the information. You really have to go down rabbit holes to find, you have to do your research. And I certainly hope that I'm giving fair and balanced history lessons on the podcast. It's always a struggle. And I wish that this stuff was taught in school so that we could feel like we had a really strong sense of our history in totality.
Well, there's just not enough time to teach everything. And I agree that something needs to be taught, right? And it's regional history, because wherever you're from, they teach your local state history. Or, North Carolina, no joke, my 7th grade social studies teacher presented the facts, I put in air quotes, of the Holocaust and asked us to decide for ourselves if it actually happened.
What?
In 7th grade public school. And then in high school, there was a giant picture of Jesus in the library. Again, public school, North Carolina. I think that the social media age and the internet age, of course, is bringing everyone closer together, and we're able to find things and connect more. But, look at our parents, these generations of people who didn't leave, they didn't travel, or maybe they didn't have the funds or whatnot. And maybe they just never knew an actual gay person or an actual trans person or you just read about these things and their stories. And again, history is written by the victors. If you hear a story about someone who doesn't like them, then that's your view of them. That's your view of who these other people are.
Exactly.
So again, I guess what I was trying to say is I don't know how on earth, and we're not going to solve it in this conversation, but how on earth we could possibly learn everything we need to learn. They don't even teach cursive in schools anymore. Right?
Well, this kind of goes back to what you were saying before about our brains calcifying in our 30s and 40s. And I think that's happening because we think we go to college and we've learned everything we need to know. We've picked our trade. We're good at it. And we don't have to learn anymore. And I remember reading something when I dropped out of college.
I didn't know you dropped out of college.
Yes, I dropped out of college. That being an educated person is being a well-read person, is continuing to educate yourself. And I think maybe my feelings of inadequacy about not having a college education and my father always wanting me to have one has made me lean into more my personal growth and my absorbing more knowledge and information throughout my life. And man, there is so much to learn. There is so much that we don't know. And like we were saying about growing up in North Carolina, listen, I grew up in Kentucky. Thank God I came to New York when I came to New York. And I was exposed to so much culture. And I had personal relationships with people who were gay, Asian, Black, dying of AIDS. I saw with my own eyes my first singing teacher die of AIDS. And so my understanding of the complexity of life and people who come from different backgrounds and origins and socioeconomic differences, like I have a very different view than my friends that were raised in the one small town and never left. And yet I still am that girl that was raised in the small, regionally southern town by conservative Christian family.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes think that you got to give people credit when they come from a place where it was harder for their minds to be open than people who were born by parents with open minds. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a lot of extra work. They don't know, again, like we said, they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
So there has to be some grace. I know we don't want to say that right now, everybody's, but there has to be some grace.
Well, there's the whole thing of like, if you disagree with somebody, instead of just saying you're wrong, you don't understand, like that immediately puts them on the defensive and you're never going to get anywhere. But when you disagree with somebody, I think the next step should just be, well, tell me why you think that way. And then you get into an actual conversation. That's more like, give me your information versus I'm attacking you with mine.
Right, exactly. And can I tell you what I just learned about that thing you're talking about?
Right.
Here's some facts.
We're going to take a short break. Stay tuned for more of the episode.
I will tell you, I just had a a political conversation with family in the kitchen. And we saw things very differently. And all I did was, there was no judgment. It was simply, well, based on what you're saying here, you're ignoring the fact that in blankety blank year, this happened. Or did you know that this, really, I got to tell you, Alan, this podcast and all this historical information is really serving me in those like political family arguments. Like, really, I was talking about the ERA to a woman who believed very different things than me. I was saying, do you know that in the Constitution, women are not considered equal? That we can still be discriminated against because of our gender? And I said, it says in there, all men are created equal. Well, if that's applying to women as well, then why couldn't women vote until 1920? Mm-hmm. Why was it that Victoria Woodhull, who was actually a presidential candidate when she couldn't even legally vote, said, well, it says all men are created equal. So ladies, let's hit the booths, let's hit the voting booths, and let's all vote. And so there were some suffragists that believed that since it said this in the Constitution, they should legally be able to vote. So they went and they got arrested. That's why we have to change the Constitution to say that we cannot be discriminated against because of gender.
Yeah, RBG was so instrumental in all of this because, again, from my point of view, I didn't know that if I were a female or my counterpart of if you clone me and make the clone a female, that we would have such a different subset of rights or mm-hmm. discrimination or whatever the case is. And it baffles me. It blows my mind how much not only did it exist originally, but how recently it changed. And even though it's changed, how much still hasn't changed at all. Because you go to certain parts of the country, you go to certain parts of the world, and it's just completely different, completely messed up. So coming back to you, you're trying to know what you don't know, but then coming from, I feel like sort of the opposite end, like the pageant scene. It's all about the looks. It's all about the money. It's all about all of the. It's like you've done a complete 180, right? And I didn't know you didn't finish college, and you mentioned that you have like guilt about. With your dad wants you to have a college education. I
did get an honorary degree from Michigan State University when I taught acting for them.
Did you? Well, then coming from the world that is so looks and superficial, then I feel like maybe I just don't know enough people that have come from that world, but a lot of people, what I see from the outside too, right, is just how many Instagram followers do I have? How many people like this post? How many people think I'm pretty in this particular thing, or I look good, or my six-pack abs are reflecting the light in a way that makes my ears not wiggle, right? So all of these things put together, while at the same time looking over your bio, you've got all of these things of just incredible activism and strength, and you've created your own production company where you're doing sketch comedy and all the stuff that has nothing to do with basically the fundamentals of how you were raised as a kid. And I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how much of that is conscious of just trying to separate yourself? And I guess, when did you sort of realize the irony of what your activism is trying to get across now versus who you are as a kid, right?
So I think what I realized really quickly was that modeling was really boring, and that it wasn't fun, but acting was fun, and dancing was fun, and singing was fun. And I remembered, like, I was very good at mimicking as a child, and mostly accents. Like, I would hear accents, like, especially like coming from Kentucky to New York. And I walked home with like a bunch of different dialects after that first summer. And I would do them and people would laugh. And they thought it was funny when I would impersonate. And I was like, oh, this feels much better than being pretty. Like, I much prefer getting a laugh than getting an applause. And I don't know where that just like, that was like so much more fun to make, because that felt like people genuinely getting a sense of joy, and to be like a cut up and to be goofy and to make a fool out of myself started to become more of who I was. But I still, of course, was raised by a woman who was raised by another woman that's like, I don't have my face on, and the way things appeared on the outside took precedence to the way that your insides shine outward. And so, but my father was very, very focused on internal beauty, internal beautification, and asked me what the meaning of life was at 5 years old. And that conversation continued till the day he died. So there was this part of me where I think that the sort of deeper parts of me were instilled by my father. And the goofball was just that I liked to get that attention. And then it began to evolve in terms of my artistry and having ideas. And I love to create. And that's when I feel the most connected to God. I guess if we're talking about the Bible already, we can talk about it again. I believe that when the Bible says we're created in God's image, does not mean that God also has a face, or looks like Ariel's dad, or Triton in the sky with a pitchfork like Zeus or something like that. It's that we are creative too. And when we get out of our own way, when we sort of dispel our own fear, when we get self-doubt, we just allow those moments of inspiration, those ideas to come, then we expand the universe. We create it. So that's what I like to do. That's my connection. That's my creativity, is my spirituality.
I was going to ask you what your idea of spirituality is. And literally, that was my next question. And I agree with that. I'm going to add to that and also say my spirituality is going on emotional journeys with strangers. That whatever that energy is, when you're sitting in an audience and everyone's crying or everyone's laughing, or you just feel like people all the time, performers are like the energy of the room. The room takes on the energy of the people in it collectively. Or when you walk into a room, or you're walking to somewhere, and all of a sudden you've never met somebody before, but you know them. And whatever that is, I don't know what that is. If scientifically there's probably a reason, and in 100 years maybe we'll figure out what it is if we haven't destroyed the planet by then. But we've got the ability to connect with people in a way that are tuned into the same frequency. That to me is spirituality.
I agree with that. So one of my beliefs is that has to do with the fact that this life is a sensory experience, and that our life prior and post this physical life is not. And the only thing that makes us believe and know that we're separate from each other is our five senses. The fact that I can see and hear you, that I can feel that I'm different from you. But if I didn't have my five senses, like if I literally was like closing my eyes right now and just in darkness, I wouldn't know where I ended and you began, or that my hand, if I could not feel that my hand hit this desk, I would believe that my energy went through it.
Mm-hmm.
So the reality is that we are all one, having this experience together, but that our five senses are telling us that we are separate. One of the things that was really interesting about the developmental books I was reading about motherhood is that newborns don't know they're separate from you.
Oh.
Until they're almost two. One, and the toddler years is when they're figuring out that they're a whole separate entity. And that's where a lot of that separation anxiety comes in. And then that's also where that sense of independence comes in when they're like two and they're like, mine, yours. Like they know that, well, they never say yours. They just say mine.
Mine, no.
But they know the difference. But I was like, whoa, how cool is that? Because I'd had that belief that we're really all connected. I think when we get past the pretense, which isn't just our five senses now, we've created, stories. Each and every one of us has a story. And that story is created deep beliefs and habits, and they continue to get reinforced. Mm-hmm. And then we see these patterns in our lives we don't want anymore. And a lot of that time is that a lot of the reason for that is that we believe our story. Collectively, we have stories. A lot of these stories, and this is ironic coming from me who is just talking about women's stories, but a lot of these stories are personal stories, and this can keep us from the connection. But when we get down to the root of it, it's all about the truth, right? When we're on stage, the truth is what connects us with our other actors, it connects us with our material, and it connects us with the audience when we speak the truth. And we are truthful in our performance. When we are truthful about our collective stories, we can connect. When we begin to tell the truth and acknowledge the truth, we then can connect. And at the source of that is love and collective suffering, which is a very Buddhist concept, but it is true. We've got a couple of constants in life. Those are change and those are suffering. And there is no change without suffering.
I was going to say truth also comes with vulnerability, because you have to be truthful, especially in a painful moment. It's vulnerable. It's very vulnerable. And if you're doing that 8 times a week, come on.
But you know what? I always found being an actor was a little less scary to be vulnerable and tell the truth, because I was revealing these parts of myself housed inside of a character.
Right.
It really wasn't until I was writing a lot of music where I was like, ooh, now this is scary because they know I'm writing about myself. You know, but again, I believe, and this is so interesting that you say this, because one of the things that I truly believe as a songwriter is it has to scare you to write it. It needs to terrify you that you admitted this. The greatest comedians say the things that everybody else was afraid to say.
Yeah.
And the greatest songwriters do it too. And the greatest authors, playwrights, everybody. But when we go to the place that terrifies us to admit, which requires pushing through our fear, requires vulnerability, that's the biggest payoff in terms of connection with our audience, but also the greatest relief. I mean, the greatest relief. And I would find that in any relationship, even with my husband, like when I finally admit, yeah, it was me. I did the thing. I did that thing that I've been saying I haven't been doing it. I did it. And it's like, oh, wait, I was terrifying. I pooped a little when I admitted it, but I feel so much better. And even if it's the smallest thing, and my husband's awesome because he laughs every time. I know it, and then it dispels it, and we laugh and we move on. It's the biggest problems we have with people, the ones that can't admit
Right.
the truth.
Right.
They're afraid, people are afraid of the truth because they're afraid to not be perfect. They're afraid to fail. And ironically, their failure is the inability.
That's something I personally had to get over with my close friends and the people I've been in relationships with is the more I care about somebody, I fell into this trap of holding more back because I was more and more afraid that by being vulnerable, they wouldn't like what they see, or they wouldn't accept me with mistakes anymore. Like when you don't care about a friendship, or not a friendship, but you don't care about like ultimately somebody that you don't spend a lot of time with, right? The standards that you hold yourself to, I think, are a lot more, at least for me, were a lot more lax, because I'm like, oh, they don't know me so much. It's not this culmination of mistake after mistake, or I feel like I'm about to make mistakes all the time, and I'm just afraid that the people that care about me will eventually see kind of what a hack that I feel like I am, right?
Every single one of us is a hack. We are constantly making mistakes. This is the thing that I definitely know for sure, is that the biggest mistakes we make are the risks we don't take. And the greatest lessons we learn are from the mistakes we make.
Yes.
But to not take the risk is you don't really learn much from that. Do you know?
All right, so we wrap up every episode with 3 standard closing questions. The first one, very simply, is what motivates you?
Well, I think love motivates everyone. The need for love motivates everyone. And our habits and our patterns get formed as a result of in what way we go about getting that love. So whether your base human emotion is fear of abandonment or need for approval, that will be your way about going for, or any other base human emotion. That'll be your way of looking for love. So for me, I think what motivates me, by saying, I say that obviously love is motivating, connection is motivating, because those things make me feel good. And so yeah, on some level I'm hedonistic and I want to feel good. I want to have fun and I want to feel love. And I get those things by being creative. And I get those things by being with my friends and family. And I also love the element of surprise, because that to me is fun.
Right.
So yeah, so I would say I'm motivated by what inspires me and the ideas that I have. And lately, obviously the things that you and I have been working on with the podcast and the album is I'm motivated about educating and empowering women and to get the right information. I'm motivated in that way too. So lots of things motivate me. I don't have any reason not to get out of bed. I'll tell you that.
That's true. You are always busy. And then the kid, Huck won't let you sleep anyway in the morning.
Yeah. Sometimes I just want to watch TV, but
Yeah. Okay. So second question is, what advice would you give to your younger self and younger people listening now, starting out down a similar path?
Well, I really believe after 35 years of being in this business and having a professional performing career, that as an actor, performer, artist, you have never arrived. There is always something to learn. And that the point has evolved into, for me, growing, learning, and not being perfect. So I think for a lot of people, it's like, one day I'm going to be on that billboard and starring in that show. I'm going to get that award. I'm going to say, I did it. I know best and nobody knows better than me. And what I've learned is that you never know everything. Nope. There is always something to learn. And the goal should be the growth, because then everything, even the kind of uncomfortable bad stuff, is serving you. It's teaching you something. And especially as an actor, when you're supposed to be able to connect with characters who are awful and experiences that have conflict, you need conflict in life. You need to have a variety of experiences to better understand human behavior. And so even your pain, especially your pain, is usable. And your mistakes are required.
I like that.
So that's my big lesson, is just like, go with it. Go with the flow. Learn what you need to learn.
All right. So the last question, this is the hardest one. If you could only
Stop resisting.
Stop resisting. If
Stop resisting.
If you could only see one show for the rest of your life, but you can see it as many times as you want, what would you see?
Oh, no. Oh no.
You're stuck on an island. Everything you need to live and be happy. And you have a DVD player with power. And you have one show on that DVD. What show is it?
Oh, a show. I thought you meant Broadway show.
It could be anything. Anything. Whatever you want it to be.
Not that this is my favorite, but I do think that Hamilton is so freaking dense that it would take me a long time to be able to absorb all that information and learn the show. So I could say that show, just because I would be entertained for a while, or at least I would be, I wouldn't be ahead of it, right? I'm thinking, Alan. Hold on. It would have to be funny if I had to watch it forever, but then I would get sick of the jokes.
Something with improv? Whose line?
Whose line is it anyway? That's a pretty fun show.
Freestyle? Freestyle of Supreme?
I have to tell you, like, I really like stylized period type shows. So I like things like Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and I'm just sort of fascinated with the design. It's so like juicy and fun for me. I love those types of shows. Something with a musical element would be really nice. I don't know.
It's okay. Don't stress yourself. Don't stress yourself. It's fine. All right. So
okay, I'll tell you, if I had to be stuck alone on a desert island and I couldn't watch anything ever again, except for this, the Carol Burnett show. That would be it. The Carol Burnett show, or like SNL. Because then I would be, if you let me see like every single episode of SNL from the beginning of it, what a study on comedy too.
Oh yeah.
And how it's evolved.
45 years of sketch comedy. Yeah. Oh, that would be a lot of fun.
I love sketch comedy. I also love bad talent videos on YouTube. And I could also just watch, or like plays gone wrong, mishaps. That is my fave. I live for a mishap.
Oh, me too.
I live for a note gone wrong.
I have to say, I am a fan of the streaming society that we are in and the on-demand this and everything, but I miss the bloopers that used to come with DVDs. That's the whole point for me of still getting a DVD when you could still get them easily, is because of all the bloopers and the outtakes.
Well, I think they probably, because what I'm noticing now is that most television shows have their own YouTube channels.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that some of them do show bloopers. So I think they're still out there, because I know every single television show I've ever done, at the end of the season, we have a party and they always show a blooper reel.
Yeah, yeah.
They always show a blooper reel and they try to feature everybody that's been in the show. And then you're like, I had one where I was like, oh, that's the only thing they had of me? And I'm like, I was really good that year. I didn't make any mistakes. But like, you want to make the blooper reel. So you need to kind of like get it wrong a couple times. There are some really, I live for a blooper reel too. I love that stuff.
So where can we find you online and where can we get the album?
Well, you can find me at Laura Bell Bundy on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.
You're on TikTok now?
I am. Listen, when you are a recording artist, you have to be on TikTok. I started out pretty strong on TikTok. I did like a parody of Mama's Got a Pump, Mama's Got a Nurse, Mama's Got a, of moms. And then it kind of went down from there. Because it really does requires a lot of time and some creative ideas.
Mama's Got a Pump.
So the album Women of Tomorrow is available on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Pandora, YouTube, wherever you get your music. And the podcast is available on the Broadway Podcast Network.
epn.fm/WOT for Women of Tomorrow. It's a great podcast. What? What with Laura Bell Bundy. Mm-hmm. You can get more of me at thetheaterpodcast.com. I'm on Instagram and Twitter at theater_podcast. Please leave a rating, leave a review, share with your friends. Thank you to Jukebox the Ghost for the intro and outro music. And Laura Bell, thank you so much. This has been such a long and fun and exciting conversation. Every time I talk to you, I learn more about just the world and what everybody should know. You are such an amazing person.
Well, thanks, Alan. I don't know that much, but I told you everything I know on this podcast. You're the best, and I love working with you, and this has really been fun.
Thank you.
Take a deep breath, make the world a little colorful.